Alrighty, thank you. I think this is on? Yes, okay. Fantastic. So hi, everybody. My name's Erin Khan. I'm really excited to be the moderator of today's panel. To start off with some introductions, I have a construction technology consulting firm, EKC, where I support contractors and tech startups to connect with each other to improve the way that we build. I'll pass it off to our wonderful panelists to give their own intro. So I'll first start off with Michael, since you're right next to me.
Hi, my name's Michael Pink. I'm the founder and CEO of SmartPM. We analyze schedule data to support project controls. Our goal and mission is to keep projects on track, on budget, and out of court. I spent my career doing that manually for about 20 years. I was a little shocked at how many projects ended up late, over budget, and sometimes going through that claims process, and my job was always to make sense of that data. I always found it strange that somebody who was far removed from the entire project needed to come in and make sense of that data, so I wanted to start working on that problem a little bit. Schedule, to me, is probably the most useful data set in construction for that. So that's me. I'll pass it on to Rohit.
Hi, I'm Rohit Sinha. I'm the CTO at SmartPM Technologies. We do what Mike said. And I'll pass it on to Dan.
What's your
My background is in software development. I've spent years as a consultant helping companies with their architecture and delivery of software, and joined Mike back in 2015 on this journey to help construction projects execute better. So, yeah.
All right, Dan Smolilo with Autodesk. Most of you know who Autodesk is, so I won't dive into that. I experience in general contracting, was there for about 15 years, joined Autodesk about 2 years ago as a technical solutions executive, and I'm going to leave it at that so we can dive into this awesome conversation.
And we will dive right into it. So kind of getting into the fundamental question here, let's just start talking about AI. So we've heard the term kind of tossed around a lot in recent times, but what does artificial intelligence actually mean? And what does it imply for developing company strategy? And maybe I'll pick on Rohit to kick us off with, what is AI?
Yeah, AI fundamentally is just a machine or algorithm making a decision for you. And there's a few different layers to it. When most people think of AI, they're thinking about it from a machine learning or deep learning perspective, where a system is looking at a lot of different examples of data, and based on that, having sort of correlations to decisions that it can make. In terms of formulating your company's strategy around there and the data strategy, you have to really be sure to have clean, good data for it to learn from, right? Especially when you're diving into machine learning, because if you're training it off of bad data, you're going to get bad results. So having that fundamental process on how you're going to actually capture your data and ensure that you have the relevant metadata that you want it to make the same sort of guesses on, or when it's these future data sets classified the same way, you got to have that good data set. So focusing on the capture perspective and ensuring that you have those processes in place is key from the get-go.
Fantastic. I also want to go to Dan and just get some thoughts as well, having been on the contractor side and now on the Autodesk side. How would you explain AI to the contractors out there, and then ideas around developing company strategy?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm a big fan of dad jokes. So there's a dad joke of AI walks into a bar, bartender asks, what are you having? And AI looks back and goes, well, what is everyone else having, right? It's kind of dumbs it down, but in the lamest of terms or simplest of terms, it's a statistic probability tool. And I think in terms of the theoretical side, we can get into generative AI and things of that side. But Erin, you come from a background in general contracting as well. We have to keep it informed of how is it going to benefit people out in the field. So really focusing on the intrinsic values of AI, kind of really dumbing down into the different verticals from natural language processing to computer vision to things like that directly affect their day-to-day, but also benefit them and make it easier for them to perform their jobs and streamline their jobs. So looking at AI as a tool that if I can make your job better and streamline it and more efficient, this is what that tool does, and that's why we should be learning about that tool.
All right. And then, Mike, it looked like you had a thought there as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's very important to think about with AI, something that I've learned too, is it's like having another brain, one that can do a lot more mathematics than you can in the amount of time that you have, with a broader set of information. And like a brain, it needs to learn. It needs to learn how to do it. And that means it needs to be trained. So I think a lot of people look at AI like throw a bunch of data in a system and then it's going to spit a bunch of stuff out to you. But it doesn't do that because it hasn't been trained. You, as a human, need to teach it. You have to teach it how to look at the data, how to organize the data. So it's very important that thought there is very important to know that it's really leveraging a process that somebody out there has designed to enable it to do mass amounts of analytics and analysis of information, but it has to follow a process that's been designed. It's not going to come up with that process on its own. And that, for explaining that to people who are leveraging it, they need to understand the concept that this has been taught to do something with vast amounts of information, but using a process that hopefully you can buy into, and leveraging that process in ways that we humans and even humans using computers just cannot.
So that's a fantastic point and leads into the next topic of discussion, or expanding rather on data strategy specifically. So what I've seen in the industry is that a lot of companies, they are, jumping on this AI. It's super hot right now. They're trying to put together strategy around AI, but realizing they need to backtrack and first start with data strategy. And that's kind of the key foundation that's kind of missing. So how do these two things, like one being AI strategy and two being data strategy, relate to influence risk mitigation with technology?
Well, I can keep going.
Yeah, take it away.
Well, yeah, to that point that I just made before, Erin, thanks for reminding me that the next question really, it does dovetail nicely into it. You have to know how to analyze the data. You have to know what data you want to analyze, right? We see a lot of people out there who, or hear from discussions about how, let's get AI, let's do it, right? But the fact is, if you don't have data and you don't know how to, you don't know what data you have or how you want to analyze it and make sure that that data is accurate, the AI strategy will not work. You can't do anything with it. So you got to think through, in order to get to AI, you have to know, okay, so there's data. There's lots of it. What is the data that's important? Second, how do we look at it? What can we glean from that data? It's basically you have to build a prototype of how do you want to look at that data and how does that information help you, right? And how does it result in better decisions or better understanding? And then you can get into training it and making sure that there's no breaches in the quality of that data. Because if the quality of that data is not there, and the process for understanding that data is misunderstood, and we don't even know what it's going to tell us and how that can help us, you really don't have much of an ability to do anything other than get a little bit more confused. But that's, kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think just in general, there's been this shift to let's capture everything that we can, right? And that kind of dovetails nicely into the first thing on the title of this session, which is IoT. Right, you kind of have the ability to capture data from all different types of endpoints. I mean, I know there's tools now that are capturing information about how many nails are being shot. And so companies are really focusing on, hey, let me just get all of the information that I can, and I'll figure out what to do with it later. And to some degree, it's like the chicken and egg problem. It's like you don't necessarily know what's going to come of it, but you also don't want to miss out later on when you figure out, going back to Dan's point, of some sort of intrinsic value of, hey, let's use computer vision to solve this problem or add this efficiency. You don't want to miss out on capturing that data when you had the chance to and think, oh, if only I had started doing this years ago, right? You have to think about it sort of together and not just jump into sort of AI is going to solve all problems. AI is good at what you sort of train it on, right? You have to say, okay, I want it to solve this problem, right? Through deep learning, you can figure out some sort of general correlations, things of that nature, and be a little bit more abstract. But really, you need even cleaner data for that, right? So focusing on that data gathering process and ensuring that it's going to be something that you can use in the future to make further decisions and really have value in the field, you got to focus on it from the get-go, right? And look at it all together.
Yeah, I think to add to that a little bit, it's changing the value proposition, right? Back in the day, it was we start a project, we finish a project. We didn't care about injuries, we didn't care about that. Cared about schedule and profitability. Then OSHA came along. We started to care about safety. Now new risk ledgers are coming out on projects, making them more complex, more liquidated damages. So changing that value proposition around the data that we capture, not as a forced activity, but more as a lesson learned that we can gather this information, start to leverage it and learn from it. I think earlier, Erin, you were in a conversation around garbage in, garbage out, right? So
Yeah.
how do we transform that? And, I was thinking like, gosh, wouldn't it be cool in the future? We're not talking about daily logs because we have trained these models to be so sophisticated. We're not doing daily logs anymore because it's automated, right? That's a little bit of the Amazon Go there, the technology side. But if we start to streamline and leverage the data that we're capturing today, because frankly, not all of us are, how much more can we evolve as an industry to remove the mundane, to make us more efficient and in theory, more profitable? We're not all bleeding hearts doing this for free. So,
Right.
there's an intrinsic value in that as well. And I think there is a change in the value proposition that does need to occur.
So, Dan, building on that, when companies are evaluating AI solutions and looking at how to practically apply them, what would be, some common things to look for, or ways to evaluate that value?
I'm kind of a boogeyman when it comes to all this stuff. So
boy.
data sovereignty, data security, things of that nature. What are they doing? How are they leveraging their data? So working with trusted customers and being able to access your data, or vendors, being able to access your data, extract it, and then interoperability of the data, right? They aren't using a proprietary format. They're focusing on data interoperability, data exchanges, things of that nature. I think those are core focuses as well, but also a trusted advisor, right? How can I leverage my ecosystem today to partner with this vendor as well as change my data? Think differently, think outside the box. AI in itself, I feel, is like, it's kind of hypocritical because, again, back to that dad joke of what is everyone else having? At some point, if we're all the same, then we're all creating the same thing, all the same value proposition. So how do we ideate? And I think that's that trusted leadership side, being able to be smarter with your data, being able to ideate on that data to kind of have that leg up. So I think there's multiple different components to that.
And then from the SmartPM team, from the tech provider side, what would be your advice to companies out there that are looking to partner with smart AI solutions? What are some of the risks and pitfalls that they should look out for?
Why don't you go?
Yeah. I think it goes back to sort of everything we've discussed thus far is the quality of the data you're capturing today. Going back to that garbage in, garbage out comment, you got to make sure that if there's an AI solution out there that you're evaluating, what are the inputs that are required, and how are you capturing that information today, and what's the level of quality that's there. You also, I mean, you're going to learn a lot through this process, and so is the vendor, right? You got to look for vendors that really want to partner more with you to really learn along the way and truly provide you value instead of just a solution, right? They have to have a deep understanding of the subject matter so that they can actually adjust the system based on your data set. And yeah, it's really looking for somebody who's willing to be more of a partner.
Yeah, what I'm taking from that is like have the true industry expertise backing up the integrity of the process behind the machine learning or, automated stuff that's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, another thing I think, and I can go off of our own experience. You have to know when you're talking to the company. Number one, what is their approach, right? How are they doing this? Like we've in the past, our own company, was told, well, this is a black box, right? So we had to be very forthcoming with our approach, right? What do we do with the data? Why do we do it that way? What are the challenges that we see in the industry? Where did we learn of those challenges, right? That credibility, that expertise, that understanding, that path to, okay, so when we do this with that data, this is what it will tell you. This is the problem that it's solving. And you can do that across different issues to ultimately determine, do I believe that there will be value when I leverage that data set to do those things? And do I agree that when they collect that data and calculate these things, the process for which they're doing it is aligned with my understanding or the understandings of our team? And it's ultimately to get to that place where the people who are using the program can trust it. And part of that comes with using it and relying upon it and seeing actual results that do align with what you were told from the get-go. So I think that as you think about the data that you're leveraging, you can ask those probing questions of what are you going to do with it and how's that going to help me? And yes, how is the math being calculated? How do I communicate that information effectively? And then looking into the future of this product, where are you planning to take this? Because all of this data needs to be collected, it needs to be consumed, and it needs to be leveraged, and it also needs to be done in an anonymous fashion. And I know from our product specifically, we have a data set that's traditionally been broken for 40 years, right? 90% of schedules have erroneous critical paths, something along those lines, erroneous float values that people depend on. So we actually have to go back in and repair the data. We have to train our AI to repair the data, and we have to know where that repair needs to come from by looking at the structural integrity of the schedule files themselves. And we have to be able to explain that that's what we're going to do, because most people coming into a room would say the last 30 years of my scheduled data is garbage. Well, we have a garbage detection and correction system, and that's possible. And here's how we approach that. So that gets a level of comfort that we can actually do something with that. Are we going to save the world with this data? No, we're going to try to make you better. How are we going to try to make you better? And as long as who you're talking with in that regard is resonating, understands your challenge, understands your pain, is making logical sense, and is actually delivering upon that, and you feel that as you engage and move forward through maybe a pilot or a trial, and then ultimately see outcomes influenced in a positive manner, then you can begin to trust, and then there's buy-in to the broader group of people who are saying, okay, I can look at this, it's telling me something, I can do something with that, and it works, and that becomes the partnership. Is we are now on the same page, that we work together here. We try to teach you through your data, you try to leverage that data in these ways, and it works. So that's really the approach that I think people need to think about, is knowing a little bit more what's behind or under the hood a little bit, making sure that the people you're working with are very devoted to ensuring your success and intentional, and have that expertise and understanding on how to get you there through their own experience, not only in the industry, but with their customers, because it's important that that organization is learning from how to improve themselves with that data.
All right. Thanks for the comprehensive answer there, Mike. Appreciate it. And it leads into another topic that we, prepared on previous to actually having the panel, which is, how do we actually get the meaningful information from the data? Where does the extraction occur? And what I'm curious to hear a little bit more from as well from Dan and Rohit, what are some of the most impactful applications of AI and data management that we've seen? So, for the audience here, if they're to take something back and say, oh, I'm inspired to go solve this use case, maybe it's with scheduling, maybe it's with something else, what would that be?
So not so much on the technology side, but more so on the individual or their persona base. Making sure you have a data governance program or data analytics team or something along those lines, because once you start to get into this realm of data for the data's sake, it's a monstrosity, right? This isn't something that you can train a project engineer that, like, good luck, here you go, Billy, here's your SQL database, figure it out. And it's like, if anyone's ever used a SQL database, the first time you looked at it was probably like, what the hell is this thing? I'm used to Excel. So one, on the technology side, is effective databases that you can leverage, whether it be Microsoft, SQL, MongoDB, things of that nature. But the personas that can effectively leverage and utilize that data. Now, I'm not telling everyone to go out and hire a data scientist, because unfortunately OpenAI and Google and the big software companies will probably pay them a hell of a lot more money than construction, architectural, or engineering. But there's a lot of groups, there's a lot of industry advocacy experts out there that can help with that. So definitely starting at the bare minimum, what is data for our organization? How do we leverage it? How do we access it? And what is our strategy for deploying that? It starts at that core level before you even talk about using databases, before data scientists, things of that nature come on board. So I think it's a buy-in, just like Bolt talked earlier about the executive buy-in to modular and volumetric construction. It's the same thing. You have to have that holistic discussion at your corporation. If you don't have that, then you're just throwing food at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a practical use and application perspective, it's really anything that's repeatable, right? Anything that you're consistently doing over and over again that, sure, the process may change a little bit or the outcome may change a little bit from a input perspective, but it's something that's going to have a consistent process behind it, right? It is really where you can leverage AI. And yeah, having the data governance in place to ensure that you're collecting the right data and can analyze it and process it through a machine learning model is definitely a key aspect of it. So yeah, it's really anything repeatable.
They're repeatable. Right. I like that. I think we often forget that these processes need to be scalable, because we're going to be doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. So the other piece of this conversation, which we touched on a little bit, but what I want to expand on, is the IoT component. So, what is this word IoT? What does it mean for us? What does data volume and all the stuff that we've been talking about so far with AI and repeatability have to do with IoT?
Yeah, I can start on that. It's really just the fact that everything can be connected now, right? I mean, you're seeing there's just so much infrastructure out there around wireless networking. Cellular chips have gotten cheaper. You have the ability to embed it inside of everything that's out there. And there are a lot of very good use cases, right? I think like equipment, big heavy machinery has a lot of IoT that's being built into it now, where they're capturing sort of the performance of the machine, any sort of issues that may exist with the engine. And there is a lot of very, very valuable things that have been enabled by IoT, but it's almost going too far in to some extent, right? And when we talk to data volume, there's so much data being generated, especially where every little thing has data transmission built into it, where it goes back to the point I made earlier, where you're capturing the data for the sake of capturing the data, right? Without having that idea of what is it that I can use this information for, right? One of the things that I find fascinating is nail guns counting how many nails are actually being fired, right? I think you can get creative and come up with a reason for capturing that. Like maybe you can use it from a quality and inspection perspective, ensuring that based on the load, you have the right amount of fasteners in place. But there's a lot of it where you're just capturing it at this point. And we got to some degree, figure out what we're going to do with the data we have today before we capture everything and anything, right?
Yeah, I'd agree to that. It's even to your nail gun analogy there, it's the counterpoint is like, granted, I shot 100 nails, but did I actually put them in the roof? Like, there's no validation.
Absolutely.
So do I need a sensor on the roof now to measure penetrations and things like that? But I think one of the other interesting thing is the amount of sensors and technology that's already in our environment that we underutilize. So it goes back to that conversation. The keynote did a great conversation about digital twin and just data, right? Streaming data. So what are we using today that we're not using, right? What are we streaming today? Think of your Siemens, your Johnson Controls, your BACnet systems. Like it's just data flowing, but are we actively engaging that and using it for predictive analytics, maintenance, things of that nature? The data's there. We don't have to do much with it. How do we manage that? So I think it goes back to, again, a conversation before we're throwing LoRaWAN sensors and little micro sensors on everything just because it's the cool thing to do. What is the end result? What is the value proposition behind it? And how do we effectively do it and measure it?
Mike, any additional thoughts?
I think my only additional thought is that when you're thinking about leveraging, IoT, you really got to hone in on where is the most waste going on, right? Where are we losing dollars? I think everybody in the room knows that construction's got some tight margins, and that's really where, when you choose your strategy, and whether it's analyzing your data, whether it's leveraging AI, whether it's tracking everything, you decide what's going to have the most influence on my bottom line, and you work backwards, and you get to a point where you feel optimal, right? And you don't start the other way around of let's track everything and see what happens. You've got to be very intentional. I think the intentional side of things is very important, and it should tie to where do you believe you will get the most value to eliminate the most waste on an actual construction project.
So I want to also ask you, Mike, SmartPM is great, fantastic about visualizing this data. And we can't make decisions from our data and our information if we can't understand and interpret it. Can you speak to a little bit more about the visualization aspect and how that helps us improve construction outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a area that we struggled in early on. And I'll just give you our history. I spent time as a consultant taking data and making sense of it and presenting it and being able to talk about it, being able to present my analytics my way to the room. And then, having done that for many years, we just naturally thought, okay, let's go put that same type of data in front of people and they should be fine. But they didn't understand it without me explaining it. So we had to get much more smarter on how do you approach that? How do we make the data speak in an intuitive way such that true collaboration and understanding can exist? And that needed to come from the minds of the people that we were selling to. So we spent a lot of time with customers making sure that our product is designed in a manner that enables them to get what they need out of it or get what we want them to get out of it, but remove the middle person of explanation. And there's many ways in which you can approach that, but visualization's key. It has to be intuitive. It has to connect with them. It has to use terms that they understand and are used to. It also needs to, you can also leverage other things like an explainer or a chatbot using generative AI. So it is important that if you're going to have a software, and leverage a platform to assist through data that you need to understand it because the learning curve is so great. So it needs to be understood by all and be able to be communicated at different levels. And that's where we really focused on learning from the customer in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things is we're trying to be preventive, right? The goal that Mike mentioned earlier in his intro is we want to solve or help solve the problem around delays, overruns. And if the data is so complex to understand that you're spending so much time looking at the data, you're not actually going to use it, right? If it's not intuitive and the visualizations aren't there where you can take a quick glance at it and make your decision, you're just going to move on and you're not going to get the adoption. So yeah, we've got a UI UX practice that will actually perform research with our customers before we build anything to ensure that our customers are going to get value out of it, right? And that's a fundamental part of the way we operate, and how most of these organizations that are trying to leverage data, because data can be overwhelming, right? You've got, like, if you just look at it from a table perspective and you've got 50 columns wide with thousands or millions of records, especially when we start looking at IoT, it's going to overwhelm you and you're not going to understand what decisions you need to make from there. So simplify that down to a visual where you've got a few key components that you can say, and we use the stoplight paradigm throughout our product, where red is bad, yellow is, hey, there's medium risk, and green is you're good, right? Just going in, you see that color, you're like, okay, I know this is an area that I'm struggling in. I need to focus on this, and you can move on and actually do those things to improve your outcomes. So
I love how it all boils down to stoplights, right? Like something we learned when we were like 3 years old.
We're not that sophisticated in construction.
Yeah, right here. We have all this amazing data, and it's here, executive. Yeah. Here's my red, yellow, green. You know, it's amazing what you can do, and I think it goes back to the personas too, right? I believe executives, they make a handful of decisions a year, and that's it, right? They're very high level. So how do we get them the impactful data and meaningful data? Red, yellow, green, right? But then once we go that next layer down, what's more impactful for them? They need to know more across their ecosystem or their division of what's happening, what's occurring. And then the next level down is kind of that fun stuff, right? That hypothesis testing. If I have a project that's behind schedule and I have over 1,000 RFIs, what's the likelihood of a safety thing, right? That's when we start to talk about predictive analytics, and we can start to test and visualize those things and see kind of whether there's a correlation between those. So it's, again, a personification of who's leveraging the data and who's utilizing it. But I think the visualization of that data is key. And again, the cleanliness of that data too.
Yeah, I love the red, yellow, green, because just as humans, we like very clear buckets and categories. So it makes it all that much easier to make complex decisions more effectively.
There's one more comment I have is that we've learned as well, especially in this industry. There's so many different people with different levels of aptitude in looking at a chart and understanding what it's telling you and looking at something and determining if that's meaningful. I think one of the other areas that's important is to know that different people view things differently and have preferences thereof. So making it customizable to a point where the user can decide how they want to view the information and in what order that supports them is another practical thing to do in this particular industry.
So we'll wrap up with one last panel question here and then turn it over for audience questions. But I want to ask our panelists, like, let's look to the future. So when we consider these technologies, IoT, data analytics, artificial intelligence, and how they all interplay with each other, what does the future look like? So we discussed in our prep, like, is every piece of equipment and material going to be IoT enabled? Is it that we have a sensor on literally every single thing? Paint that picture for us. So maybe let's start first with Dan, and then we'll come back down the line.
So I always think of WALL-E, right? Everyone's got their floating chairs, and we're all like fat and just floating around because everything's automated and we got robots. No, but in all seriousness, I think optimization and automation, right? Back to that daily reports thing. Why are we doing daily reports? Well, we need to paint the picture of what occurred today. So if we can optimize and automate via computer vision, data capture, progress tracking, material management, well, we shouldn't have to do daily reports, right? That's already done at our fingertips. We have our green light for today, and we were effective on what we did. So it's going to remove those tedious tasks that a superintendent's doing on a Saturday at 8 p.m. at night for the previous week. The other thing is optimization, right? How can we build better, safer, and faster, and be more profitable? On the design side, how can we optimize the design? How can we streamline building codes and at the click of a button or a prompt, or maybe the Elon Musk's Neuralink, think of a building and it will appear in Revit or a design solution like that. So, if I would have to boil it down, it's definitely the optimization and automation.
Okay, Rohit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to end up with a highly connected data set, right? That's one of the things that, or one of the issues that exist today is you've got all your different groups and different stakeholders on the project, internal even to the general contractor, that's operating on their own isolated data set. And bringing them together is what's going to be the first step to lead to a lot of that optimization, where you can get that complete picture of what's happening and why did it happen, right? And from there, Dan's exactly right? There's going to be optimizations that are going to be unlocked because those mundane tasks that tend to have the most data quality issues will be automated to a point where you remove that sort of, hey, I have to do it because I'm being told to that data is just there and it's of high enough quality that we can make better decisions from there. So efficiency gains, less material waste, just overall better building, right?
All right. Mike, you want to wrap it up and give us some last thoughts on it?
I was talking to a buddy of mine recently and talking about our methodologies and why we're doing what we're doing. And he asked, it seemed a little bit overwhelming to him of what my view of the future is. So I had to go about 200 years down the road and say, okay, so if we're looking at a world where buildings are built, they're going to be built the same. There's going to be equipment, there's going to be materials, and there's going to be either humans or robots and or both assisting. To get to a point where it's systematic, right? It's optimal. We have to optimize. The data needs to be tied together of understanding who's putting what material in place using what equipment over what period of time. So all that data does need to be pulled together and needs to be studied. And it needs to be studied in a manner where we are truly understanding all these different moving parts, what the risks are and what are good responses to those risks to right the ship. It's going to take time to get there, but it's certainly very possible. And yeah, it does revolve around taking different data sets that exist and pulling them all together into one, we'll call it a central nervous system of understanding that compares good outcomes and bad outcomes and learns from it to then reinform the industry and the people using this type of technology, consistent and further best practices that can only feed upon itself. So it's going to be like any other industry that's gone through an optimization process, and it's going to take quite a bit of time. But that's my vision, is we can get there, and we will. It's just going to take a lot of time to connect all the different parts and pieces into a central nervous system of understanding, and then use that to learn and relearn and relearn, and we will get to that optimal place.
The future is learning, is what I've gathered.
That's true.
All right. So at this point, we'll turn it over. We think we have just a few minutes left to any audience questions. And yes, I see. I think it's Cam.
I have one question maybe for Rohit, you didn't answer it, or maybe any of you guys, but you guys started out talking about getting clean data so that you can then train that data to ask questions. If you're talking to a mid-market general contractor, what is the tech, how would you actually set that up? Literally what tools would you use? You mentioned a MongoDB, how, literally how are they going to set that up at their company?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily about the tools being used to store or collect the data. It's really about the process, right? And that starts with having them understand the value of the data itself that they're capturing, and putting the right processes in place. We talked about like the mundane tasks of filling out daily logs. People are doing that because they're obligated to, not because they see the value in it and are gonna put the effort in to have meaningful information there. One of the big things from a scheduling perspective, especially in the mid-market, is we had to offer a boot camp in order to help them understand the value of that data and how it can help them make better decisions off of the data itself and what it's telling them, so that they can improve the quality of the data going in. And then, of course, we've got sort of processes in place to help you validate that the schedule itself is going to give you meaningful results. So it all starts with just taking a step back, forget about the technology aspect of it, think about the data you're capturing and what value you're going to get out of it. And then from there, you can take the next step in terms of the technology. The technology itself doesn't really matter. It's whatever you're most comfortable with, whatever you can get sort of on your in your ecosystem, right?
I think to add to that, for kind of a prescriptive query to the customer is, do you have an SOP? Is it digital or is it analog? Right? That's going to glean a lot of insights on that customer of how difficult it's going to get them on that digital journey. If it's analog, it's out of date, right? The second you publish anything analog, it's out of date. So why I mention a digital SOP. A digital SOP leads you to think that, okay, they're starting to standardize and they realize I need to go digital with my SOP because it evolves and changes. So now they understand intrinsically the value of data and the value of digital data. From there, query questions of, are you using enterprise search? Are you using things like bots to farm your SOP, right? Because then that will lead directly into standardization of data. How are you inputting your date fields? Is it month, day, year? Those simple questions that could tell you a lot about a customer. If they say, hey, I don't have a standard, well, then you know this is going to be a big uplift, right? We need to train them on standardization, optimization, and what are those tasks? How are you capturing that data? So I like the SOP question because it really gleams into that organization and their maturity. So maybe a tip or a comment on that.
So we have one last minute. Any last questions? All right, so let's give it up for Dan, Michael, and Rohit. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.